Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg, is situated at the northeastern corner of the Baltic Sea at the head of a long, shallow gulf dividing the southern shores of Finland from northern Russia. Historically significant, Leningrad was the capital of the Russian Empire before the Russian Revolution, founded by Tsar Peter the Great. The city's name changed to Leningrad in honor of Vladimir Lenin after the Bolsheviks took power, and it retained this name during the Soviet era. Even after the fall of communism 20 years ago, the older generation often still refers to it as Leningrad, not out of nostalgia for Lenin, but in remembrance of the approximately 750,000 civilians who perished during the near 900 days of the Nazi siege from September 1941 to January 1944. The Siege of Leningrad remains one of the most harrowing episodes of World War II, characterized by extreme suffering, immense loss, and remarkable resilience. On the morning of June 22, 1941, Leningrad stood as a city of historical grandeur and industrial significance, largely unchanged in appearance since the pre-revolutionary era. A bird's-eye view would reveal the choppy gray Neva River, flanked by parks and palaces, the naval dockyards to the west, the Peter and Paul Fortress to the north, and the city's concentric waterways and grand boulevards to the south. Despite this external continuity, the city had been profoundly altered and traumatized by its recent history. Any resident aged 30 or older had already lived through 3 wars: World War I, the Russian Civil War, and the Winter War with Finland; 2 famines, the Civil War famine and the collectivization famine caused by Stalin's policies; and waves of political terror under Stalin. The imminent siege would be yet another dark chapter in their lives. In August 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union stunned the world as the two ideologically opposed regimes agreed to a non-aggression pact, dividing Poland between them. However, this uneasy alliance was short-lived. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. Leningrad, with its population of just over 3 million, was quickly thrust into the front lines of the conflict. In the initial weeks of the invasion, the poorly prepared Soviet defenses were overwhelmed, and by mid-September, German and Finnish forces had encircled Leningrad, cutting it off from the rest of the Soviet Union. Hunger set in almost immediately after the encirclement. The Luftwaffe's bombing of the Badav food warehouses in early September exacerbated the food shortages, and by October, emaciated corpses began appearing on the streets. The situation worsened during the brutal winter of 1941 to 1942, with temperatures plummeting to minus 30 degrees Celsius or below. In December 1941, the death toll quadrupled, peaking in January and February 1942 at around 100,000 deaths per month. By the end of the winter, cold and starvation had claimed the lives of approximately 500,000 people. Despite these horrific conditions, the city's inhabitants displayed extraordinary resilience and resourcefulness. Daily life in Leningrad during the siege was a constant struggle for survival. The city's residents faced severe food shortages, with rations reduced to mere scraps. Bread, the staple food, was often adulterated with sawdust and other inedible fillers. People resorted to eating anything they could find, including pets, wallpaper paste, and even leather goods. Reports of cannibalism, though rare, underscored the desperation of the situation. The cold added to the misery, with fuel shortages making it impossible to heat homes adequately. Many buildings were damaged or destroyed by shelling and bombing, leaving people to live in makeshift shelters or in the ruins of their homes. Despite the dire circumstances, the spirit of the city's residents remained unbroken. They continued to work, attend school, and participate in cultural activities as best they could. Factories were relocated to safer parts of the city or to the outskirts, and workers labored tirelessly to produce the weapons and equipment needed for the war effort. The city's cultural institutions, including theaters and orchestras, continued to function, providing a semblance of normalcy and a morale boost to the beleaguered population. One of the few lifelines for the besieged city was the Road of Life, an ice road across Lake Ladoga. This perilous route allowed for the transport of food, fuel, and other essential supplies into the city, and provided an evacuation route for some of its residents. The road was subjected to constant bombing and shelling by German forces, and many trucks and drivers were lost in the treacherous conditions. Despite the dangers, the Road of Life was a vital artery for Leningrad, and its operation was a testament to the determination and bravery of those involved. In January 1943, a Soviet offensive managed to break through the German lines and establish a narrow land corridor to Leningrad. This breakthrough allowed for more consistent supply deliveries and marked the beginning of the end of the siege. Over the next year, Soviet forces gradually pushed the Germans back, and in January 1944, the siege was finally lifted. The relief of Leningrad was met with immense jubilation, but the city had been irrevocably scarred by the ordeal. The end of the siege brought a sense of relief, but also the daunting task of rebuilding a city that had been devastated by nearly 3 years of blockade. The death toll from the siege was staggering, with estimates ranging from 700,000 to 800,000 civilians perishing from starvation, cold, and bombings. The physical and psychological scars of the siege would linger for decades. In the post-war years, the Soviet government sought to commemorate the heroism and suffering of Leningrad's residents. The Piskaryovskoye Memorial Cemetery, where many of the siege victims were buried, became a focal point for remembrance. Monuments and memorials were erected throughout the city, honoring the resilience and sacrifice of its inhabitants. The narrative of the siege was also shaped by Soviet propaganda, which emphasized the heroism of the city's defenders and the leadership of the Communist Party, while downplaying the failures and mismanagement that contributed to the severity of the crisis. The Siege of Leningrad has been relatively underrepresented in Western historical narratives compared to other significant battles of World War II, such as Stalingrad and Moscow. This is partly due to the initial censorship and propaganda during the war, which limited the information available to Western audiences. Harrison Salisbury's 1969 book, The 900 Days, The Siege of Leningrad, was one of the first comprehensive Western accounts, shedding light on the harrowing experiences of Leningrad's residents. In the Soviet Union, the narrative of the siege was tightly controlled by the state. During the war, censorship was all-pervading, and the full extent of the suffering was not publicly acknowledged. The Soviet government admitted to mass starvation, but avoided detailed discussions about the failures that led to the crisis. Post-war, the narrative shifted to emphasize the heroism and resilience of Leningrad's residents, fitting into the broader cult of the Great Patriotic War that glorified the Soviet struggle against Nazi Germany. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, new sources and perspectives have emerged, allowing historians to re-examine the siege with a more critical eye. Access to Soviet archives has provided new insights into the internal dynamics of the city during the siege, the role of Soviet leadership, and the experiences of ordinary citizens. This has led to a more nuanced understanding of the siege, recognizing both the extraordinary resilience of Leningrad's residents and the significant failings of the Soviet government. The personal stories of those who lived through the siege provide some of the most poignant insights into the human experience of this tragic period. Diaries, letters, and memoirs reveal the daily struggles, fears, and hopes of Leningrad's residents. The poet Olga Bergholz, whose broadcasts on Leningrad radio provided a source of comfort and inspiration for many, became a symbol of the city's indomitable spirit. Her own losses and suffering mirrored those of the wider population, and her words captured the emotional and psychological toll of the siege. Other diarists, like Tanya Savicheva, a young girl who documented the deaths of her family members in a heartbreaking diary, and Dmitry Likachev, a scholar who survived the siege and later became a prominent cultural figure, offer invaluable first-hand accounts of life in besieged Leningrad. These personal narratives bring a human dimension to the historical events, reminding us of the individual lives affected by the vast, impersonal forces of war. The legacy of the Siege of Leningrad continues to shape the collective memory and identity of St. Petersburg and Russia as a whole. Annual commemorations and events mark the anniversaries of significant dates related to the siege, such as the beginning of the blockade and its eventual lifting. These events serve as a reminder of the sacrifices made by the city's residents and the importance of resilience and solidarity in the face of adversity. In recent years, there has been a renewed interest in the history of the siege, with new research, publications, and exhibitions exploring different aspects of this complex and multifaceted event. The opening of previously inaccessible archives and the availability of digital resources have allowed historians and the public to engage with the siege in new ways. This has led to a richer and more nuanced understanding of the siege, acknowledging both the heroism and the suffering of Leningrad's residents. The Siege of Leningrad stands as a testament to human endurance in the face of unimaginable suffering. The city's inhabitants endured cold, starvation, and constant bombardment, yet they held on, contributing to the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. The legacy of the siege is complex, shaped by the interplay of heroism, tragedy, and the harsh realities of life under siege. It serves as a poignant reminder of the depths and heights of human behavior in times of extreme crisis. The memory of the Siege of Leningrad continues to resonate, not only as a symbol of resilience and sacrifice, but also as a warning of the horrors of war and the need for vigilance against the forces of tyranny and aggression. The stories of those who lived through the siege and the lessons learned from their experiences remain relevant today, inspiring future generations to remember the past and strive for a better, more just world. Do well to like, share, comment, and subscribe as we bring you more intriguing historical stories.